Hey guys, Brian Osborne here from Answers in Genesis, and in my hand I hold something very precious to me during my childhood. It is a transformer. Now this is Ian's transformer, but as a kid I loved Transformers, and Ian loves Transformers too because, especially for boys, they're just cool. They're little toys that can transform from one thing to another, like from a dinosaur into a really cool robot like Optimus Prime here, and then back to a dinosaur. And how neat is that for boys, right? And but yeah, I loved Transformers as a kid. Kind of want to pass on that passion to him, my son Ian, in a silly way as he's a kid loving Transformers too. But they're really neat. They transform from one thing to another. And of course it's trivial as a toy, but in today's lesson we're looking at a really wonderful transformation. We see that Saul is converted and he is transformed from one thing to another. We see that before Saul is converted, he is persecuting those who followed the way, those who are following Christ. He's persecuting the church. He's breathing out murderous threats. He approved the stoning of Stephen. He got letters from the high priest to go to Damascus and to arrest those of the way, to throw them in jail, men or women, did not matter. And we see in the lesson he's on his way to Damascus, and then he has an encounter with Jesus that changes his life. He gets transformed by this encounter. Of course, Jesus appears in a great light, and Jesus asks Saul, "Why are you persecuting me?" And Saul wasn't sure who this was. And he said, "This is Jesus whom you are persecuting." And we know that he's blinded from this encounter, and he's taken to Damascus. And there, 3 days later, God sends Ananias to give Saul back his sight. Of course, he's later called Paul. That's his Greek name. Saul is his Hebrew name. But to give Saul back his sight, and then he's filled with the Spirit and baptized. And there's an immediate transformation. Why? Because Saul has been saved. And this great persecutor of the church now goes to a proclaimer of the church, a proclaimer of the gospel of Jesus Christ. He's staying there in Damascus with the very disciples he was coming there to prosecute and to throw in jail. How ironic is that? How cool is that? And he goes to the synagogue immediately, and he's teaching the truth about Jesus, showing them from the scriptures that Jesus is indeed the Messiah. And they could not rebut him. They could not defeat him in arguing that he was proving them from the Bible that yes, Jesus is the promised Messiah. And they were so aggravated by this that they wanted to kill Saul, and he escapes out at night. And we see that Saul becomes the target of many threats. Actually, he's targeted with the threats that he had been threatening Christians with before he was changed. But we see a radical transformation in Saul. And if you're a Christian, you've had that same sort of radical transformation. Now, I know it's easy to look at Saul and think, okay, well, Saul was essentially a murderer of Christians, right? And that's not me. And so his testimony is a lot better than mine. People would like to hear that more than hear my testimony. My testimony is just kind of pretty normal, normal in a earthly sense. Or you might know the testimony of a friend who has the testimony of they were steeped in a horrible lifestyle, in drugs or whatever, and they were radically saved and transformed from that lifestyle to a totally different one. You think, well, that's better than my testimony, which may seem so plain for many of us. But guys, in truth, if you've been saved, your testimony is radical. You've been radically transformed. And it is worth sharing, not to show how much you've changed or show how awesome you are, but to show how awesome God is in that great transformation of you and what he has done really in that. You see, if you've been saved, you have gone from being an enemy of God to being an adopted child of God. You see, all of us, whether you're Saul or not, if you're not saved, you're an enemy of Christ. Either you're with Christ or against. Either you walk in light or you walk in darkness. And guys, in our unsaved state, we are in glad rebellion against our Creator. We are trying to actually supplant God in his place. We're trying to be our own God. Our lives are blasphemous by definition. They're idolatrous because we worship ourselves and our own thinking. We're really trying to take God's spot. It is heinous rebellion against our God. And when God saves us, it is an awesome thing. He has saved an enemy and made that enemy a child by his mercy, by his grace, by his power. And he's done that for every one of us, whether your name is Saul or whether it's John or whether it's Mike or whatever your name might be. If you're a Christian, you've been radically transformed. And so as we think about Saul's transformation, we think about how things can transform from one thing to another, how Christ does that in our hearts. If you've been transformed from one thing to another, it's a lot more important than a silly toy. You've been transformed from an enemy of God to a child of God. You were once in rebellion against the Creator. Now He's made you part of His kingdom, an ambassador for Christ, and He's changed you from the inside out. And once you've been changed, like Saul, when he was changed, we'll go from hating God and pushing God away to now loving God and proclaiming who He is to the world around us. What a radical change that is. Praise God that He can transform any of us. And if you've been transformed, that is a powerful testimony. Share it. But share it not to show how you've changed, but share it to show what God has done. What an amazing thing, changing an enemy to a child. That's a radical transformation. You guys have a good day. We'll talk later on. See ya.